welcome to InfoSec Pros. I'm Kayne, the field CISO at Hyperproof, and I'm joined today by Jim Rutt, CISO and CIO at the Dana Foundation. Welcome to the show, Jim.
Thanks for having me, Kayne. Looking forward to the discussion.
As am I. And because this is a live stream, if you've got a question for Jim, or a question about the Dana Foundation or about Hyperproof, please drop it into the comments on either LinkedIn or on YouTube, and we'll take those as we go. So just to start off at the very top, Jim, tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do, and also what the Dana Foundation does, because I know you and I have talked about the confusion over which Dana Foundation and what are they about?
It's either the Dana Foundation, the Dana-Farber Cancer Institute, the Dana Center. We get confused with all of them, Kayne. So I run tech and cyber at the Dana Foundation. We're located in New York. We're about to celebrate our 75th birthday as well. We were founded in 1950. So our focus is on neuroscience, or has been, I should say, for the past 32 years. So the first 18 years were in arts and education, pretty standard fare for a private foundation. But since 1992 or so, we've been focused first on neuroimmunology, which is, I never say that word right, but it's the imaging of the brain. So taking a look at the brain and trying to figure out why things happen, from a neuroscience perspective. About 3 years ago, we brought on, or there was new leadership that was brought on. And so now our focus is kind of changed in a very exciting direction. I think especially relevant and topical for the discussion we're going to have today, which is neuroethics, neuroscience, and the greater society, which could lead into AI ethics, because you have neural networks within AI, you have neural networks within neuroscience, obviously. So it's super exciting to see that progression, and to be kind of very well laid out in the tenor of the times.
Yeah, and I think that's a really essential topic these days around ethics and around artificial intelligence. I think there's a number of social conversations happening about that, right?
Certainly.
Well, let's talk about some of the areas where Dana Foundation is currently using AI. Before we get into some of your suggestions about like how to perhaps ethics associated with it, but how are you currently using AI, and are you seeing any real specific benefits from it?
We are, but we're taking a very measured approach, both in form and expectation. So about 7 or 8 months ago, I realized the need to address this head on. So, there's a lot of questions about AI, obviously, because it's something new. I mean, new in, I would say, the public vernacular. We as professionals have known about machine learning and some of the formational aspects of AI for many years, I'm sure. But so I started taking a look at it and figuring out how best to both get some value out of it, but make sure to mitigate whatever risks that could be associated. We're still in the early innings, in my mind. I'm sure there are risks out there that have not been fully mapped and accounted for. So essentially, we start here internally, probably a very similar use case to a lot of other folks dabbing their toe into the AI pool and looking at trying to see if we can get efficiencies around mostly back office operations to start. So finance, we use ChatGPT, we use Microsoft's Office 365 Copilot tactically. Besides ChatGPT, we use a couple other off-the-shelf, I would say, GPT type models as well. We're using some of the AI capabilities that are recently infused with some SaaS platforms that are standard here at the foundation. Eventually, our goal is to bring more of a closed source or a closed model approach towards usage of AI as we get more specific in the data, and also the analyses that we plan to do to further future programmatic development here. It's going to be a little more sensitive, so we want to make sure we have a greater measure of control, as it were, for these.
Okay, so it sounds right now your benefits are qualitative, not necessarily quantitative. Like you can't throw up a hard number and say by using, I don't know, ChatGPT or by using Copilot, we saved 20 hours a week on some routine task. You don't have those sorts of numbers quite yet.
Not yet. No, I don't plan to have those kind of efficiency numbers, material like cardinal numbers, probably for I would say another year or two. I enjoy seeing some of the qualitative benefits. I should add also, besides finance, communications as well. It's guiding in communications form, and it's a good, I would say, like a check and balance against some of the ways that we're facilitating communications as well.
Okay. And now, thinking of it from a cybersecurity perspective, you're a CISO, I'm a CISO. Have you used any strategies to improve your cybersecurity defenses that are using AI? And if you have, can you talk a little bit about how there's always been this narrative going on, right, about productivity gains for incident response or for people who are working in the SOC, Security Operations Center, if you're seeing any of those efficiencies?
So I think about protecting AI and the data that it basically it works on
Hmm.
as in line with any other data protection scheme that we would choose to kind of pursue. At its heart, that's what everybody's worried about. Yes, it's a little bit different in form. Like I said before, it's more of an unstructured environment, but we have unstructured data outside of AI and whatever LLMs that stuff runs against right now. So I think just making sure that we're conscious of the data that we feed in, the responses we're getting out, making sure that we have reasonable, I would say, assurances that
Hmm.
the data that we put in is limited in terms of any kind of exposure from a sensitivity perspective. Where we've got a pretty, I would say, sophisticated user base here at the foundation. So I'm less worried about folks inadvertently throwing sensitive data into these models or these user interfaces, as it were,
Hmm.
other than understanding kind of what are the possible ways that data could be misconstrued from an image perspective, right? I mean, we're always worried about branding and the like. So nothing different, I'd say, from a control perspective, software control, than what we would be doing in a data protection, regular run of the mill data protection kind of strategy.
Okay, and I want to go back to your user base in just a minute, but I want
Yeah.
to double down on the question, because I was at RSA and everything was AI, or at least 80 to 90% of everything was AI and cybersecurity and workforce productivity gains. You've managed to avoid that so far? Because I feel like a lot of the AI stuff right now in cybersecurity is kind of hype.
So, okay, since you pushed me, I'll definitely talk about some of the controls in general, right? So,
If
I,
they're
like
AI
you,
related, like if you're
yeah.
if
So,
you're I don't know, doing AI firewall rules or AI incident response.
So I've seen probably 2 to 3 dozen AI firewall or WAF type tools, walk through them. I've got a very good idea of how they work, and I think they're a little too narrow right now. Need to take a more horizontal approach
Hmm.
towards AI defenses or AI controls in general. They just Most of them seem to be focused on more in-house LLM development or SLM development, which will be important, obviously, for us in the coming years. But
Hmm.
right now, I think about data protection. Again, data protection is kind of at the core as being much more of a wide problem, and I'm a
Hmm.
little hesitant to bring and keep shifting in and out controls for a specific type of data protection. In this case, AI,
Okay.
even for something as unique as this. I don't
Mhm.
see the value of doing that. So I'm still keep an eye on the control market, as it were, hoping to see a little more maturity there. It will get there. It's just not there yet.
Okay. All right. So your findings are kind of similar to mine. So I
Yeah.
want to go back down to your user base. And before today's show, we were talking about one of the controls that you had in place of an acceptable use policy. And ultimately, like you
Yes.
don't get technical controls until you at least have a policy, and well, you don't get a policy until you at least have a business reason for having a policy. So how did you like walk the audience through how you approached the development of your acceptable use policies for AI? And a little bit about what you thought about your key considerations that you had to work through.
Knowing at the beginning, Kane, I wanted to make sure that we hit this issue, as it were, of AI head on,
Hmm.
rather than wait for the demand, as it were, to bubble up afterwards and kind of play catch up. So I thought about what would I expect from our user base, again, from a regular data perspective, how to act. What's good common sense stewardship of the foundation's data, uh, in a responsible, ethical manner that you would for anything else. You think
Hmm.
about policies that we've had about using the internet. I mean, as simple as that is, there's kind of a parallel between that and the usage of AI, because you're looking to get the same type of results in most cases, right? You're querying a model, you're trying to get a result, or you're feeding data in, and you want to make sure you're not feeding anything sensitive or something else that you don't want to leave the perimeter, as it were. So in building it, it was fairly simple, but we had to think about some of the specifics around the ethics and the like, because that's something we haven't touched on. And I think bringing that in at an early stage and developing that, obviously there's templates galore out there if anybody wanted to copy anything, but there's certainly, for our perspective, being a member, kind of a quasi science community, I think it
Hmm.
was important that we address these types of things head on.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and I like that you were proactive about it. I
Okay.
think we're seeing. I don't know if you saw the thing out of Colorado, their new employment labor AI. That's going to be subject to litigation, I suspect. But we're
I
also
did
seeing
get
a whole bunch of AI developments. And since you wrote your policy, have you really had to update your policy based on any of these external regulatory or legal factors?
less on that, Kane, and more on any new functionality that I might see, to make sure that those gaps we think about, even if we have not specifically adopted tools that employ any kind of new functionality. And this is a great point. I suspect this is one acceptable use policy I'm going to be front and center, ready for updating at any given time, because of just the rapid ascent of development in this area. I mean, it's crazy. And I'm trying to forecast as best I can where this technology can lead us as practitioners, for what benefits it can bring to users and what risks it can bring to all of us. So it's I want to get ahead of it, and it's not the easiest thing. As you know, we're getting pounded with information about this stuff, and I subscribe to a ton of stuff as well as you do, I suspect,
Hmm.
and keeping up with it is kind of a treadmill. But I think where we can keep ahead of these things as much as we can, it's better than trying to follow and get ourselves into a hole.
All right. All right. I think it's a good point. You also, at the top of the show, had talked about integrating some of these technologies like ChatGPT and Microsoft's Copilot. And I'm guessing you didn't just, FOMO it. You probably had some defined processes. So, at a high level, can you talk us through how the Dana Foundation integrates new AI solutions into your stack, and also how you make sure that it actually is working towards your organizational goals?
So in terms of the latter, how it works into our goals, we still have some challenges because we don't have predefined KPIs on what we expect out of them. So
Hmm.
I would say, more or less, we're for the newer pieces, we're very flexible, minus the areas of acceptable use that have already been defined.
Hmm.
I think the other benefit of bringing that acceptable use policy is to help folks learn also how to use the technology in kind of a roundabout way. I think they pay more attention to and there's a ton of tutorials for all the tools that I've described before. So, thankfully, a lot of our folks have taken initiative to try to learn these things. I would like to formalize training at some point.
Hmm.
I see that happening definitely within the next quarter or so here at Dana. It's going to be very exciting. So we're on board to. I've kind of answered the question in a roundabout way, but for the standalone type of tools, I think we need to firm up some training there, but that gap will be closed quick. It's
Right.
more also of the, I would call it, infused AI pieces within some of the SaaS productivity tools that we use outside of Office 365 or some of these other things, and getting folks to understand exactly what to expect out of them. And in some cases, we don't see a clear benefit, but it'd be
Hmm.
interesting just to see if there's any side benefits from them. So,
Yeah, you actually reminded me of a thing that recently blew up on LinkedIn around Slack. and around their AI model. How do you keep track of that, Jim? About all of these new SaaS products or existing SaaS products that we have that say, "Look, we've built AI into our thing," and they're not always consistent or good about providing those updates to folks. How are you tracking that?
So luckily we had that huge blow up with Zoom, I think about a year ago, I think, or
Yep,
9 months ago.
I remember
That
that
was
one.
that was kind of the opening salvo. And I would have never thought, by the way, Kane, that it would be such a heated discussion or a heated blowback, initially, until I really started to educate myself back then about the downstream effects. And boy, I'm glad that happened at that particular time, because now when we're looking at anything that has to do with AI, I think the first question in front of our mind should be, what are the ways that this data could be used to train, third party models, or downstream models, or transitive models, or anything outside of our purview. We need to at least have an understanding of that. Whether we accept the risk is another measure entirely, but at least knowing that and being able to answer these types of questions. And to kind of add to that, I thought it was interesting just yesterday, I believe, or 2 days ago, the announcement with Microsoft infusing Copilot directly within there's some new laptop models, I believe.
Yep.
That has already brought up a lot of questions here. I'm thinking about potential deployment of some of these things, and now I'm kind of stepping back a little bit, although I'm excited to see if that could really help take some of our practitioners to the next level. Some of the capabilities, from the very reasons that you just described, I think are giving me pause.
Yeah, I think that's a interesting problem space that we continue to see. It reminds me of, the some prior technologies, like when cloud first came out, there was a lot of hype about it, and then everybody kind of just moved rapidly into it without some of the considerations that perhaps those organizations should have taken.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. I'd like to step on that one for a second, because we were one of the early adopters in cloud. In my mind, though, my prime moving case for that was to get out of the data center business. And I think, being
Hmm.
here in New York, we in the past 25 years we have had what I would call five major business interruption incidents, which gave enough precedent and enough risk mitigation for us to kind of go into the unknown at that time. And that type of a calculated risk had
Hmm.
had benefits that we're still drawing on, I'd say 10, 15 years later. So I don't know if I'd be willing to take that level of risk again with AI, and just go all in and throw everything into the pot. I think we're taking the right measured approach towards it, but I'm hoping to get commensurate returns on this eventually when we start measuring them.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, especially based on something we were talking about before we started recording, where you were talking about. I'm going to mangle this, but I think you talked about privatizing or making one of your AI models, the
Yeah.
training data associated with it being proprietary or private. Um, so talk us through some of the factors about your decision to privatize an AI model as opposed to using a public one, and how are you going to secure that and make sure it's also
Well,
efficient to your end users?
yeah, I think from a security perspective, I think it'd be the easiest way to do that. But I also think, from a control perspective, which is one area that I think a lot of folks haven't thought about, in terms of being able to control the training processes. I mean, there's a lot of questions around cost and the like. Although I should hope we'll see some kind of economy of scale helping to drop the pricing in that area.
Hmm.
I just think the total, what we plan to do around that could have repercussions internally. I'm not talking about outside repercussions in the foundation in terms of impact, measurement of some of our programmatic areas, as well as a direction that we would want to take in the future. So, that's a little more core to our mission and vision. I'd like to keep that in house, so to speak, in the family, until we have a better idea of the outputs or the impact. At that point, I'd be willing then to look at other options, or external to the foundation there.
All right, but near term, you're looking at
Yeah.
actually making your own, because this is where a lot of those SaaS vendors, I think, are getting in trouble, is that they're assuming that not only can they have your outputs, but they can also take your training data and use it to train their own models. And what I'm hearing you're doing is using your own training data to improve your own model.
At least in the short term. That's correct. I mean, again, when I get reasonable assurance, I would say that the risk there is low.
Hmm.
Uh, we'd be willing probably to, from a cost perspective, obviously, if it made sense, and also usability perspective, we would then look to to either publicize or non-privatize it.
Fair enough. All right. And then how are you working on, I want to break this question up. I want to talk about domestic compliance before I talk about larger rest of world. Because we've seen, like we just mentioned, Colorado's thing, but also I know New York State did a thing with employment labor law associated with artificial intelligence, and we're seeing other artificial intelligence actions domestically. How are you really balancing those compliance demands with the need to innovate?
Well, I think that's a superb question. I think before we even ask that question, it's how do we understand the possible ramifications of all these new statutes coming out in and of themselves, right? Even if
Hmm.
it's not an AI specific statute, you mentioned labor and law. There
Hmm.
could be other research type of implications. I mean, there's obviously not only legal but ethical concerns around some of these areas. This really opens up a can of worms, Kane. I think we're going to need AI to help us get through all the different regulations and kind of figure the gap analysis from that perspective. I ultimately we do the best we can. We start to think about it from I think the way that privacy regulations have been formed in some of these different states, as well as the European Union and the like. They've taken a good approach towards it. How practical is it to then extend those to other areas of regulatory risk? It's going to take a lot more research and a lot more time, but we're going to take it piece by piece as these things start to materialize.
Yeah, did you see that thing out of, I want to say it was Utah, where they said, look, if you're an AI developer, you can participate in our AI research. I think that's Research Foundation or Research Council, and that gives you reduced regulatory burdens in reporting. Is that something you've looked at?
We haven't looked at it actively, but I could certainly see the draw for an offer like that. It takes a lot of the pressure off of somebody
Hmm.
to have to worry about that. It's certainly worth thinking about. I wonder if that model would be replicated more broadly. It'd be very interesting to see what the impact would be on the private sector. Some of these other areas where you do have to worry about these things out of band.
Yeah, and I
More to
want to
come.
now, yeah, I want to rotate back now on privacy, because a lot of what I've been reading about is out of the EU, and it mostly has to do with the extraterritorial nature of GDPR. Um, is that something that you're running into in your business and your training models? Because are you dealing with, like, maybe this is an opportunity to educate the audience on what neuroscience foundation looks like. Is this like PII and PHI associated with individual humans, or is this something more esoteric that doesn't
Hate
tie
to
back
burst.
to an individual person?
Yeah, hate to burst your bubble. We don't really use on a regular basis in any kind of operational data manipulation or work or analytics. We don't have to worry so much about PHI. It's more those are more abstracted out, or PII. We really don't have to worry about HIPAA or any of that kind of stuff. Thankfully, I've been in
Mhm.
healthcare and I can understand the ramifications there. So I don't really have an understanding of how to like segment them out. But it would, I could certainly see a time where we expand some of our programs in that we have here at the foundation, and that kind of data starts to get collected and potentially gets exposed to a model. So we certainly have to plan ahead for this. And thankfully, we're kind of thinking about that progression in the right way, even before we start developing. Whereas there's been a lot of retrofit work, I should think, in regular structured data, and now even when that's extended, via RAG or some other method to LLMs, there's still a lot of thought that has to happen rather than just trying to plunk something in the middle and try to block this stuff.
Pardon me, I had to cough there.
Oh,
Um,
sorry.
that's all right. I put myself on mute. Allergy season and all that.
Yeah.
Um, so moving past just the compliance, there's a couple risk management frameworks out there. There's NIST and there's the ISO one. Are you aligning your AI initiatives with either of those?
So ISO, little high end for our taste, but I've always been a fan of the NIST 800 series for regular, I would say, legacy risk management. Right.
Uh
So you
huh.
have the NIST 800 series, and then the new cyber management framework. So I have looked at the NIST AI regulations. I like the core of it.
Uh
It's
huh.
very simpler to understand, govern, map, measure, manage. I haven't really delved into the individual controls under each one of those headings, but I believe it will make for a good, I think, walk test for a lot of the controls that we may want to plan to bring on, but also thinking very carefully about how our data could possibly run afoul, or some of the actions that we take run afoul of it. And it would always be good to conform. I love frameworks for the reason of, at least you have some measure of governance and provenance around this stuff, because there's so many unknowns, and the
Right.
changing nature of AI in general is going to multiply that effect as well. So at least we have some standard that we can shoot for. If we don't match it day one, it's obviously understandable. I think in cyber in general, as you well know, there's a lot of gaps that we've seen with a lot of
Yep.
organizations. So if we make our best effort to do that, I'm certainly satisfied.
Okay. And then thinking of the larger risk management environment that we're in for AI, especially thinking of the deepfake case out of Maryland. How are you really addressing some of the personal and organizational risks associated with AI and the risk of, I don't know, executive deepfakes, whether they're being used for business email compromise or whether they're being used for just reputational harm?
Well, hopefully the cyber gods answer my prayers, because I happened to see a startup just last week trying to solve this very problem around at least video deepfakes. Right? I mean, there's other types of deepfakes that haven't even been addressed, but I think generally speaking, it's not gonna be the easiest thing to do. I mean, I saw, as well as that case in Maryland. I think about the one in Hong Kong with the tricking of the finance personnel to swindle $25 million. That to me smacks of not only poor understanding of what could happen, in a video situation, but poor internal controls for an organization. Same as business email. I liken it to business email compromise through
Hmm.
phishing,
It's
which
very
we are very
similar, yeah.
familiar. Very similar, and most of the time, my answer there is: have you checked your internal controls? Do you have the proper, double checking when it comes to any kind of monetary transfers? In most cases, there's some gaps there. We've firmed up those gaps here, but we are not infallible for a risk like this. This is something really new, and it could certainly evolve into something that, we may have to give a secret handshake offhand, or have a out of band communication to verify our, or to have non repudiation, as it were. Right?
Yeah, I do
So
think that's a really good point that you make there. And also, just as a reminder, this is a live event. So if the audience has questions in the chat, please do drop them in LinkedIn or on YouTube. We will see them, we will take them live. But Jim,
sure.
your point on really two-person control for any major financial transaction, that's something that I've seen a lot of organizations get better at, thankfully, since COVID, because we did see that during that same time, right, where it was possible to call somebody up, and because we were all accustomed to working remote, you couldn't just walk down the hallway in an office and say, hey, you actually telling me to do this thing, like change a bank routing number or an account number or make an off the books transaction. Are you finding that those controls are working and that you might have adopted during COVID to defend against deepfakes?
Yeah, they've been working well so far. In the abstract, Kane, it's very interesting. You think about two of the types of controls that can help out in your overall risk management, seem very easy in the abstract. One is, as we've been talking about, like a two-person control. The other one is MFA, like everybody
Hmm.
keeps talking about. And it's like, wow, just enable an MFA. As you and I know, there are certain, issues, not so much issues, but challenges around that. Doing it in a at scale and in different work environments with different types of working devices, with different types of applications and platforms. So, yeah, I mean, I see it as the same type of thing. It's in the abstract, very easy to implement. In practice, a little bit more complicated.
All right. So let's move on past deepfakes. Let's talk about trends in the future. So in your industry, where do you think AI is going to really make the most beneficial impact? And how are you preparing as a research foundation to really be in front of those trends?
It's going to be very interesting, Kane, to see the type. So I should back up a little bit and explain what our main core work is here at the foundation. So we fund grants here. So there's a lot of work around grant submission, and I could certainly see the way that these ideas or these research proposals get submitted, and what form they would take in the future.
Hmm.
And so AI will certainly have an impact on the way that research that our academic customers, as it were, start to submit these things, as well as start to take a lot of the, I would say, inefficiencies between finance and the actual programmatic part of our business, as it were, where we do a lot of outreach and we
Hmm.
really promote from an educational perspective, from the lay to the, I would say, to the very esoteric, what the brain is about.
Hmm.
In general, there's a number of foundations that do that, and we're part of that ecosystem. There's just a lot of there's still a lot of inefficiencies out there that can be solved by AI. Obviously, from an operational perspective, from a research perspective, it's going to be interesting to see at the forefront how it can impact the next generation of what I would call in research. And this is kind of out of my ballpark, but or out of my sandbox. But as brain computer interfaces start to become more mainstream,
Hmm.
these are the types of things that we're seeing, and how AI is going to make these things a lot better. It's going to be very, very interesting.
But that's not something you're currently working on yourself.
No, that's way beyond my pay grade.
Oh boy, yeah, the cybersecurity controls associated with that and the risks associated with that. I think anybody who's thinking of the old William Gibson Neuromancer novels
Yeah.
might be very cautious in light of current events of cybersecurity issues associated with current technology, let alone an IoT that you directly connect to your head.
Yeah, that's apropos, no question.
Yeah, seems like a bit of a bad challenge there to address. Huh. But you're talking about at least finding inefficiencies. So, like one of the things that I find myself is just the sheer amount of research that I read, whether it's jurisprudence or law journals or regulatory filings. I find it's very easy to use an artificial intelligence to summarize it for me with a fairly good degree of efficacy. And we've got clients here who've saved hundreds of hours for just reading like regs, trying to figure out how do we comply with this, to use an AI to summarize it so they get intentional direction as opposed to having to wade through ultimately what feels like filler. Are you finding your team is having that same success level with just summarization of content?
Yeah, we're starting to see that, right? So one of the, I would say, holdups in that area is that a lot of the data is very esoteric. So you need subject matter experts to double check the
Hmm.
outputs from some of these models. So obviously, it's going to take a lot more care and thought. It's not just summarizing. I would say like a financial disclosure or whatever, which could be pretty straightforward for anybody in our finance area, to be able to double check the output of that summarization. A little bit different when you're talking about so many nooks and crannies, as it were, in the area of neuroscience. It can be very esoteric. But yes, I do see the opportunity to increase that, from magnified. I would say it will happen as these tools
Fantastic.
get better. Yeah.
All right. Well, it's going to be interesting to continue the conversation with you and find out like what we're all seeing in terms of efficiency gains.
Oh, for sure, no
Maybe
question.
in
I'm
less
very
less
excited.
theoretical. Yeah, absolutely.
I'm very excited for this, for what this technology can offer, and just hopefully we can do it in a safe, secure, and as risk managed as we can.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I think that's possibly a good place for us to wrap up today. We've had kind of a quiet audience. We don't normally do this on
Mm.
Wednesdays,
Oh,
but again, if you have questions from us, you can always drop those in the chat afterwards. We will respond. Just it won't be a live response. But I want
sure.
to thank you for being on our show today, Jim. And if you're watching this, or if you're watching this the recording, and you know somebody we should have on the show, or alternatively you think, wow, I'm the person who should have been on that show, drop it out in the comments or just DM me directly. But Jim, I want to thank you again for joining us, and thank our audience again for tuning into today's live stream.
Kayne, thanks again for having me. It was a wonderful discussion. Well handled.